Today we are going to prove that if two lines, y equals m1x plus b and y equals m2x plus b, are perpendicular, that only happens if and only if the product of the two slopes, m1 times m2, is equal to -1. And to do that, we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. We're going to use the converse of the Pythagorean theorem. So if a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared, then the triangle contains a right angle. So the way we're going to set it up is we can draw any two lines. Here I've got a red line and a green line, but we can draw any two lines that are perpendicular on our graph. Okay, and we're going to make them perpendicular so that they've got a right angle. It can go anywhere, but for the sake of simplicity with the algebra that's going to be involved, we're going to make them cross at the origin. And this is going to be 1. So I'm going to connect them here at 1, again, just for the sake of simple algebra. And that means that this point here is going to be the origin, 0, 0. This point is going to be 1, m1. And this point is going to be 1, m2. Because it's the slope of this line, it'll be changing y over changing x, so it goes up whatever the slope is to the right 1. And since you're dividing by 1, it's just going to be m1. And same thing here, m2. So we've got our point 1, m1, 1, m2, and 0, 0, the origin. So using the Pythagorean theorem, our three sides, this side, the distance theorem, tells us that we're going to have the square root of 1 plus m1 squared, 1 squared plus m1 squared, plus square root 1 squared plus m2 squared, all squared, is equal to m1 minus m2 squared. So that'll be our c, m1 minus m2 squared. And it doesn't matter which one's, if it's going to come out positive or negative, because we're squaring it anyway because of the Pythagorean theorem. So with a little algebra, squaring a square root gets rid of the square root and we're left with what's underneath. We got 1 squared, which is 1, plus m1 squared, plus 1 squared is 1, plus m2 squared. And then if we FOIL this out, we get m1 squared minus 2 m1 m2 plus m2 squared, because m1 times m1 is m1 squared, m1 times m2, negative m2, negative m2 times negative m1 is minus 2 m1 m2, and negative m2 times negative m2 is positive m2 squared. So from here, we can simplify. 1 plus 1 is 2, plus m1 squared plus m2 squared is equal to m1 squared. I'm going to move this one up here, plus m2 squared minus 2 m1 m2. And I'll show you right now why I decided to move that. Well, on the left side I've got m1 squared, and on the right side I've got m1 squared. So I can subtract m1 squared from both sides. I can do the same thing with m2 squared. So subtract m2 squared left with 2 is equal to negative 2 m1 times m2. When I divide by negative 2, I get negative 1 is equal to m1 times m2. m1 times m2 is equal to negative 1. So we've shown that anytime we've got perpendicular lines in a graph in the Cartesian coordinate system, anytime we've got perpendicular lines, the product of their slopes will be negative 1.